Hey guys! This week we're going to talk about the concept of inner critics. And while this isn't a traditional DBT skill, it definitely ties in with several, thinking like mindfulness of thoughts, observing and describing our thought processes, non-judgmental stance, distress tolerance. The IMPROVE acronym ends with E for encouragement, and this idea that we can take our inner critic and reprogram it to be our inner cheerleader. And also the idea of like self-compassion, practicing the same level of acceptance for like humanness and the fact that we all have flaws for ourselves that we would practice with other people that we care about. So what is the self-critic? The self-critic is the conversation that runs in your head that tells you you're not good enough, you're not deserving, you won't be able to achieve the things you want to achieve, you shouldn't try or put yourself out there in an authentic way because it's not going to work out for you or people are going to make fun of you. And our inner critic typically starts developing when we're pretty young. It's influenced by the people around us, like our parents, our grandparents, our school system, our religion. And, like that is a time of life where we're learning the rules of what it means to be human, right? Like how we want to show up, how we want to interact, what it means to like be in relationships, being reciprocal, giving and taking. But as neurodivergent people, we tend to be especially sensitive to criticism and critique. And even if it's packaged in a kind way or it's meant to help us grow, a lot of us really like cling to those times where we've been told for whatever reason we aren't enough or we're too much. And that voice becomes like stronger and more consistent in our own head over time. And our inner critic like initially develops to protect us, right? Like I don't want to do things that would get me called out and then make me feel shame. But over time, if we let it rule our life, we just like kind of slough off parts of ourselves that are real to fit into somebody's idea of who we're supposed to be. And that's not a pathway to like long-term mental wellness. And so knowing what your critical voice is, being able to hear it and label it when it's going on inside your head is step number one to changing your relationship to it. All mindfulness, right? Like the idea is to change anything, we have to be able to observe it first. You may be on the pattern right now of getting in these places where you just hate on yourself and your thoughts and you get stuck in that and you do it for hours and you just like tell yourself, all these reasons that you are not good enough. And those are moments that are fueled by your inner critic. And, for those of us that had chaotic lives, stressful childhoods, traumatic childhoods, like being uncomfortable, feeling like we're not good enough, that's, for a lot of us baseline. Like it's what we search for that feels like peace. Even though it's not peace, it's what our nervous system is identified as. This is comfortable because it's normal. It's what it's experienced the most. And so we do have power to change that, but we have to get to know that voice first. And the first step we can do in that is paying attention to it and notice and being inquisitive when we are experiencing it. For a long time, I would have told you that my inner critic is my mom. And while, yes, my inner critic is influenced by my mom and many of the choices she made during parenting, it's not her because my mom wasn't all bad. And my inner critic is all bad now. It's just a function to keep me, stuck in old habits, not exceeding, not living my best life. And so I initially, when I did this exercise with clients years ago, I'd bring in a picture of like my mom and young Jamie, and this is it, like this is the personified version here that tells me when I am not good enough. But over time I realized like that's not quite it. And so I've come up with this picture, which if you're a 90s baby, you recognize this as Angelica's mom from the Rugrats. And in many ways she very much symbolizes my mom, or like is very similar to her. She's constantly wearing a suit. She is thin and petite and blonde and wears pretty intense makeup with, blonde hair. And in the 90s, when not everybody had one, she always had a cell phone to her ear. Very similar to my mom. But a characterization, right? And a much more extreme characterization because a character that is like just portrayed as one side, where my mom was dynamic. But that's what our critical voice tends to be, one-sided. And when I took, yes, her voice was informed by my mom, but it wasn't my mom. that like left some space for healing in our relationship, right? Because she wasn't anymore like the negative voice in my head. And so when I was constantly punishing myself in the present for things that happened 20 years ago, like I couldn't blame her for that anymore because it wasn't her voice. So what is the opposite of having a really negative inner dialogue with yourself about yourself? Having a really positive one. And to start out, that may feel uncomfortable. And so if you need to start out thinking about like when I identify these critical thoughts, what are just neutral ways that I could rewrite these statements, right? That is absolutely a dialectical perspective. If we can't get all the way to the positive end of the spectrum, if we can at least get to the middle, we've done half the work. And so if you can identify, you know, are there a couple of phrases or behaviors when your critical voice comes up, looking for patterns like we always are in DBT. And then like the most consistent ones, those are the ones you handle first, because if we can knock them out, a lot of times the other stuff goes away on its own. This idea of what is it like to be your inner cheerleader. There's a lot of ways you can go about it, but I love some of the like really simple ones of writing yourself on a piece of notebook paper, a list of 10 things you like about yourself, or writing sticky notes and placing them on your bathroom mirror and somewhere in your bedroom where you see them when you wake up, somewhere in your closet where you're choosing your outfit for the day. Reminders of all the good that you see in yourself and the potential that you want to embody. Because when we think back to like neuroplasticity and how our brain works, our critical voice, for those of us who are like me, we've spent a lot of time like in that type of brainwave. And so that's pretty like hardwired. And so if we're trying to wire something new, we want as many occasions as possible to trigger that. And so taking that like thought and making it a physical thing that you can be cued to, that can invoke like, oh, let's just have a positive conversation with myself right now. Be a huge game changer. You know, like having an encouraging statement on your home screen of your phone so that every time you pick it up, there's something that brings a smile to your face and makes you feel good about yourself. Within the last few months, as my life has changed, one of the things I've really tried to do is tell myself every single day, like find something and say, I'm proud of you, Jamie. And that's such a little thing, but it's huge because for years, all I did was pick out the things that I failed at. And I let myself know all the time how disappointed I was. And disappointment's not a great motivator. We know that because most of us who like really bathe in shame tend to stay stuck in old places. So the idea of self-compassion, being to yourself in the way that you would with your best friend, your parent, somebody that you love, giving yourself benefit of the doubt, recognizing common humanity, that all humans make mistakes. All humans right now are existing within late stage capitalism. So there's like all these systems that are, you know, really making life harder for us day to day. And as neurodivergent people, we're just like hyper aware of those things, that, you know, technology exists and life could be easier, and yet it's so stinking hard right now. So common humanity, being kind, practicing kindness, right? Asking yourself as you're having these internal dialogues, would I be okay if I said this out loud to a 5-year-old? And if you're not comfortable saying it to a 5-year-old, you shouldn't be comfortable saying it to yourself, because most of us still have that 5-year-old inside of ourselves that's hurting pretty bad. And so that's a really good way of a litmus test, if you might, of like, is this critical voice? If it's too harsh to say to a 5-year-old, it's your critical voice, and it's worth rewriting. I'm going to link a couple of journal questions in the description, as well as the worksheet pages that go along with Improve and Mindfulness of Thoughts. See you guys next week.